Chapter 23, Friday, 12:30 a.m. Gabriella, Cynthia, and Adeline. I turned on every light from the bathroom to the kitchen. Several times I almost pulled the trigger on the .45 when I saw a rat out of the corner of my eye. But either I was too slow, they were too quick, or they had magical powers that allowed them to vanish into thin air when there was nowhere to hide. Reaching the kitchen, I pointed the gun inside the refrigerator after opening the door. Telling myself to chill, I pulled out 2 bottles with my free hand, butt-closed the refrigerator door, and leaned back on it to make sure it shut tight. Stepping carefully over to the kitchen island, I placed the .45 next to my laptop and put both feet on the top rung of the bar chair. I hate rats. I drank the first beer slowly, mainly because I spent most of the time watching the door to the hallway. I told myself that's where they would come from, not the pitch darkness of the front ballroom where I was headed next. I also reminded myself that I was massively bigger, meaner, probably smarter, and most importantly, armed. I relaxed when I realized I was looking forward to seeing one of the little fuckers and blowing it all to hell. That didn't mean I intended to hunt for trouble by sleeping in the bedroom. Besides, I wasn't tired, and if I needed a little nap later, there was more than enough room to stretch out on the island. My days were numbered. Why waste them on sleep? And that thought brought me back to the plan. Tom and I considered it a certainty someone would come for me. We had always known that it might not be Nikki, even in the beginning. As time went by, the chances of it being Nikki lessened. As Larry said, most likely whoever showed up would be someone willing to kill for money, probably someone getting paid to do what they loved. I had just opened the second bottle when it hit me, and I laughed. I'd laugh too if I was hiding from a fucking mouse, the voice in my head said. I'm not hiding, and it wasn't a mouse. It was rats, as in lots of fucking rats. And that's not why I'm laughing, I replied. Whatever. Are you going to execute the plan? I glanced up at the poorly hidden cameras and lowered my voice. Damn right I'm going to execute the plan. First things first. I pulled the laptop in front of me. First, the FBI surveillance. An hour later, I began to laugh again. The voice didn't ask why, and I didn't offer to explain. As a rule, I only answered the voice. The satellite link from the mansion to the FBI was like the trapdoor from the lawn to the basement. But instead of stepping out onto a lawn, I'd stepped into Jonathan Freed's world. Freed was the FBI geek who had set up the link to the server. Maybe they told him it was a one-off, unimportant, don't waste time on it kind of thing. Or perhaps, like many IT staff, he just valued his time more than his superiors did. In my old life, it was almost always guys like Freed, individuals with outsized security clearances, who left keys under doormats. Freed took indifference to a new level. He had an FBI laptop, a desk server in the office, and a personal server at home. He was also responsible for doing security audits for the Denver FBI office. The computer security was so pathetic that I thought it might be a honey trap. I started laughing again when, after an hour of intense digging, I concluded it was what it seemed. Freed was just an ordinary specimen of the sluggish slacker who bragged about it in his private email to other slackers. An hour later, I was no longer quietly hacking. I was Jonathan Freed, working overtime. 2 things had changed. I now accepted that my time was limited, and for the first time, I didn't care if anyone caught me hacking. In fact, I almost wondered if Freed was just a way for the FBI to help me bring Dragna to the mansion. They preferred he kill me. Given my grim prognosis, a bullet to the head was as good as it got. However, I wanted him to tell me things before he killed me. The FBI and I were locked in serendipitous synchronicity. This meant that I had to make sure that Dragna needed information from me more than he needed to kill me. The mansion was my honey trap, and I knew exactly how to bait the trap. Tom and I had planned that part out. Dragna would come, but then I had to stay alive long enough to find out what happened in that New York parking lot and why. Of course, the downside to this plan was that the only place to play this game was upstairs. Nikki was ex-Special Forces, and he could bring tech to let him see through walls. I needed to be able to move and keep moving, which meant I had to know what was on those old floors above me. In the near-total darkness of the ballroom, I couldn't make out the massive snake-like stairway leading up to those rooms, but I could swear I saw 1,000 red, beady eyes staring hungrily back at me. If I had known what I would find upstairs in the light of day, I would have left my perch on the island and run for the river. But I didn't know, and I wasn't about to go to sleep now that I knew about the rats. I needed something to keep me occupied. My mind wandered, and I realized with shock that I wasn't thinking about my dead wife. I was thinking about my best friend, Cynthia. I thought that she, not Gabriella, would have been the one to stand by me in the end, and Cynthia was who I would have wanted to be there. And now, though not for the first time, I realized why I tried so hard not to think about her. She wouldn't have liked what I was doing or where I was headed. Cynthia had been a teacher, someone who lived for others. I told myself it didn't matter. She, like Gabriella, was gone. I was on my own, and at that moment, I had an epiphany, or so I assumed. Self-reflection was never my strong suit. Like Gabriella, I had always lived for myself. Maybe I had time for me to live for somebody else. Perhaps I could, in the end, be the kind of person Cynthia deserved. I pulled up the Google map showing the mansion, the guest house, and the grove of Russian olives. Whose trees were these? Adeline's or the half-eaten Driscoll? It had been a long time since I did anything for anybody that didn't revolve around me. It felt better than good. It was the right way to end things. So, armed with my AI bots that I had recruited to find Nikki, and the power of the FBI without its legal restrictions, I went to work. "Okay, I don't see anything on the screen that has anything to do with the plan," the voice said. "That's because it doesn't," I replied. "You're dragging your feet." "No, I'm changing my life." "I see. Now you have a life? Kinda late, isn't it?" "No. I'll pull the trigger on the plan in the morning after I get some things in place." "Now, fuck off," I said. And since I was now a new man, I smiled to take the sting out. Sunlight shone through the kitchen windows when I shut down my laptop, more excited than I could remember. I was feeling a little cocky. I still had the chops. I told myself I had gone hands-on old school and hacked into Arapahoe County's digital land records. Okay, maybe it wasn't entirely old school, since I was using Freed's access to FBI tools. Still, it felt good to be back in the saddle. Once in, I didn't try old school. Very few people destroyed sensitive, even damning records when everything was still paper. There was always the chance they could be useful someday. Instead, you bury them deep in a file cabinet, a record room, or, if the federal government, in a warehouse full of boxes. Nothing changed when we went digital. The boxes of information stored in those warehouses were scanned and reburied as quintillions of records on server farms. Nothing changed. The data was still available to anyone in the know. Looking for a piece of paper in a warehouse is daunting but doable, with enough people and money. Looking for a non-indexed scanned image in petabytes was humanly impossible. So I put a massive army of artificially intelligent crawlers to work. While they were busy digging into all of the county's land records, I did something humanly possible. I used the FBI computers to pull down satellite images from dozens of classified sources. I never figured out who planted those damn trees, but I found a fence line had once existed between the mansion and Adeline's house. All I had to do was find what remained of that old fence. Hopefully, the trees would be on Adeline's side of the fence. Talk about old school. After breakfast and a short exploration of the mansion, I would go outside and crawl under those damn trees. With luck, I could tell Ms. Ratchet what she could do with her HOA tickets before noon. That would take care of Adeline's immediate problem. Regardless, I would pull the trigger on the plan that afternoon. What I was excited about was that I was sure I could do more than that. What I had found might turn Adeline's life around after I was gone. I didn't want her mixed up with my problems. It wouldn't be easy for her. It would take time, and there were no guarantees. But she would have a fighting chance, and I would have done what I could. My army of AI bots had uncovered why Adeline and the feds had trouble selling these historical sites. It wasn't because they were historical. All that was left was to go upstairs and figure out how to stay out of Dragna's hands long enough to negotiate an exchange. I would give him what I had, or rather would have, and he would tell me why my life had turned to shit. I tried not to think about the rats I might find upstairs, as I made a full breakfast of coffee, eggs, bacon, sausage, tater tots, steak, and toast. Then I washed and dried the pans, plate, utensils, glass, and coffee mug. If I could have found a damn broom, I would have swept the floor. After a trip back to my toilet room, where again I avoided looking in the mirrors, I made a fresh mug of coffee, drank it, and, finally, I strode to the bottom of the stairs, squared my shoulders, and took the first step. I stopped on the second floor and looked down a long hallway, lit by a single high arched window at the end. Every door along the hallway was closed. Cold, misty tendrils fell across my shoulders. The house creaked a chuckle, and I thought I saw motion at the far end of the dim hall. When nothing else moved, I told myself to take it one floor at a time and slowly walked down the hall several steps to the first set of doorways. A light was showing under the door on the right, the southeast side of the house. One door at a time, I corrected myself and stepped into a room where bright sunlight poured through the large stone-encased windows. Dust flickered like white-hot ash as it swirled up from the wooden floor. A large fireplace sat at one end of the room. I dutifully checked the windows to ensure they were locked shut. For all practical purposes, those old windows were welded shut. Nicky wasn't coming in this way. On the other hand, without some preparation, I wasn't escaping through a window. Dusty and dark hardwood cabinets lined the wall on either side of the windows. Gabriella called them armoires, and they stored clothes before someone decided closets made better sense. I remembered her telling me that someday we would have a bedroom with antique furniture. We had been in a Manhattan shop that carried just what we needed in the future, expensive old shit from the past. I had told her that by the time we saved enough for the bedroom, we'd be antiques ourselves. She hadn't seen the humor. My eyes ran down to the wall with the fireplace and stopped. In the corner of the room was a full-length mirror, one edge against an armoire and the other against the fireplace wall. And in that mirror, Gabriella, dressed in a long white dress, stood motionless, her back to me. The dress was a gown worn at balls when the house was full of life. It covered her shoulders, and the sleeves were tight on her slender arms. Gabriella's long, jet-black hair cascaded in tight curls from the elaborate coiled hair on the top of her head. The mirror showed no reflection of the room where I was standing. I saw what she saw, an endless, dark tunnel. I stared at her for a long time before deciding, what the hell, all marriages have their problems. Reluctantly, I walked over to the woman I would spend an eternity with to apologize for bringing us here. Gabriella, I'm sorry. I know this is my fault. You have no idea how badly I want to know what happened. All I know is that I fucked up really bad. But here's the thing. I plan to bring the man who shot us, and hopefully the man who ordered it, here and soon. Maybe even late tonight. Look, if I thought I could personally make them pay, I would kill them myself. And maybe that's how it will go down. But one of them is a professional killer. Our best chance of making them pay is to keep them here long enough for the cops to get them. Kind of like one of the honey traps I used to tell you about. You know, the stuff that bored you to tears. I stopped a few feet in front of the mirror and waited. Gabriella didn't turn around or answer. Was she waiting for me to join her in her walk down that long black drop into nothingness? I felt the room fade away until all that was left was Gabriella, blackness, and me. She turned her head, and a single tear flowed down her cheek as I stepped forward to join her. Then I gasped and fell to my knees. The front of her dress was drenched in dark red blood. She looked down at me, eyes bloodshot, lips twisted in derision, with worms of blood crawling out of the holes Craig Nicky's bullets had punched through her beautiful body. I vomited, and when my stomach emptied, I began to dry heave, my tears splashing into the putrid mess. When I lifted my head, I caught her looking at me as though she was sorry. Her dark eyes, no longer bloodshot, seemed to reflect the blue Colorado sky, and her mouth was pulled down in a sad frown. She quickly looked down at her chest where worms squirmed free, then slid down her dress, leaving blood trails on her white gown, before joining the pulsating mass growing at her feet. Pulling a worm emerging from her chest, Gabriella studied it for a moment, and then squeezed blood from one end onto her finger, as though she were pushing toothpaste from a tube. Then she traced a red S into the air between us, which hung as if painted on glass. Dropping the flattened worm, she reached for another and another, without looking at me. She seemed to gather herself, and then looked down at me, pointing a finger in accusation. Her bloodshot eyes glowed in anger, and her lips once again twisted in disdain. The word, stop, hung in the air, glowing like hot embers. Then, as though she had drawn on wet glass. The letters slid down the time and space between us, losing their hard brightness as they spun into the infinite darkness below her feet. Her hateful eyes never left mine, and I knew I deserved it. All of it. "Gabriella, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. All I can do now is what I'm doing," I pleaded. I gazed into her eyes and watched the anger turn into something else. Regret? With a sad shake of her head, she turned her back on me and walked away, swallowed by a darkness that dissolved around her, leaving only the reflection of a broken-faced, scarred man on his knees, his face wet with tears. I begged her to return, to forgive me, but she refused. I didn't blame her. The man in the mirror, on his knees, was disgusting. He was a pathetic failure who put his wife in danger, didn't protect her, and wasn't able to get her justice. Yet. Later, I stumbled down the stairway, staggered to the shower room, tore off my clothes, sat under scalding hot water, and replayed what had happened in the room upstairs over and over. What did Gabriella mean by stop? Stop asking for forgiveness for the unforgivable? Stop promising and deliver? Stop whining about being the one who survived? Of one thing I was certain. There had never been the slightest amount of turn the other cheek in Gabriella. I had often seen her angry, but not at this level. It would take an eternity of obsequiousness on my part for her to calm down. I stayed in the shower until what I believed was limitless hot water began to cool. Toweling off, I walked past the steamed mirrors with a glance, went into the bedroom, laid on the bed, and stared up at the ceiling. Gabriella had pushed me past the tipping point. Enough with the guilt. Later it would occur to me that I even forgot the rats below me. Dying in the mansion to live there for eternity was now entirely off the table. I wasn't going to stick around this dump forever. Yet that wasn't the real problem. Gabriella's murder happened in New York City. Her ghost showed up as a ghost in St. Louis, and then she followed me to Denver. Perhaps she would return to the mansion if I spent my last days in Larry's motels. That felt like a win-win. All I had to do was change the plan, so the cops got Nikki, and I got out alive. I decided to worry about what to do when Gabriella and I were back on the same plane of existence. I was tired of avoiding mirrors and windows, and that was how I came up with a new plan that seemed to solve all my problems. The answer was in my garage, where a truck to die in waited. I would head north to the wide open spaces in Wyoming, the Ten Sleeps, Wind River, or Browns Park. They were places where outlaws like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid hid out. Good country to hide in, hard country to sneak up on somebody. And best of all, no fucking mirrors. And if Gabriella wanted to follow me and make faces at me on the way there, let her. If I had to spend eternity putting up with her, I would damn well do it somewhere I wanted to be. There was just one thing I needed to do before I threw the switch that would bring Dragna looking for me. I was going to find out who owned those damn Russian olive trees.